Some people spend their entire lives working, earning, and striving, yet never seem to move forward financially. Their income changes, their jobs change. Sometimes their effort even increases, but the outcome remains the same. At the same time, Scripture records a different group of people. Individuals who were not always the most powerful, not always the most connected, not always the most aggressive in pursuit. Yet their lives reflected stability, provision, and continuity across time. The Bible does not present this difference as luck. It does not attribute it to personality or talent. It presents it as the result of order. Money in Scripture does not respond primarily to desire. It responds to structure. When structure is present, money settles. When structure is absent, money escapes. This is why the Bible rarely speaks about getting rich quickly. It focuses instead on habits that operate quietly, habits that do not draw attention, habits that do not promise speed, but habits that produce results over time. These habits appear repeatedly across Scripture. They are visible in households, in kings, in nations, and in individuals. They are not framed as motivation, they are observed as patterns. The first habit Scripture reveals is Yah's priority. Throughout the Bible, provision is consistently linked to order, and the first element of that order is placing God first. This is not presented as symbolism, it is presented as practice. In biblical households, the first portion was set aside intentionally, not after expenses, not after comfort, not after uncertainty was resolved, but before everything else. This habit was not about reducing wealth, it was about stabilizing it. Scripture shows that when people delayed God's portion, money became reactive. Decisions were made under pressure, expenses expanded, fear entered. When God was honored first, something changed. Money stopped leading decisions. It began following them. This habit trains the heart. It establishes discipline before desire. It forces planning before impulse. Scripture records that when this order was respected, provision followed without sorrow. When it was ignored, wealth often arrived with anxiety, conflict, and instability. The habit itself is quiet. No one sees it. No one applauds it. But it governs every financial decision that follows. The second habit Scripture highlights is stewardship. The Bible places enormous emphasis on how resources are handled, not just how they are acquired. Scripture repeatedly distinguishes between owners and stewards. A steward does not assume resources exist for consumption, they assume responsibility. In biblical accounts, stewards who managed carefully were entrusted with more. Those who were careless lost even what they had. This habit operates quietly because it happens behind the scenes. It shows up in tracking, in planning, in restraint. Scripture records that even abundance collapses without stewardship. At the same time, modest provision multiplies when handled wisely. Stewardship turns income into structure. Neglect turns income into consumption. This is why two people earning the same amount experience entirely different outcomes. The income is identical, the stewardship is not. The third habit concerns diligence without haste. Solomon observed that diligence leads to abundance, while haste leads to poverty. This principle appears repeatedly throughout Proverbs. Diligence is not a frantic effort, it is a steady application. Scripture contrasts those who pursue quick results with those who build patiently. The first may experience rapid gains, but Scripture consistently records that they are difficult to sustain. The second group builds slowly, quietly, consistently. This habit builds wealth without noise. No dramatic breakthroughs, no sudden reversals, just steady accumulation. Scripture emphasizes that God honors faithfulness, not speed, not intensity. Faithfulness. This is why the Bible does not celebrate extremes, it celebrates perseverance. Diligence applied with an order compounds over time. Diligence applied to disorder accelerates collapse. This brings us to the fourth habit, controlled consumption. Scripture does not condemn enjoyment, but it consistently warns against excess. The Bible records households that lived within their means and endured. It also records individuals who consumed everything they had and lost stability. Controlled consumption means spending intentionally rather than emotionally. It means decisions are guided by order, not impulse. This habit is difficult because it does not look impressive. It does not signal success. It does not attract attention. But Scripture shows that freedom is preserved by restraint. Wealth is not defined by how much enters your hands. It is defined by how much remains under control. Uncontrolled consumption undermines every other habit. It erodes stewardship. It pressures diligence. It destabilizes generosity. This is why Scripture repeatedly connects restraint with wisdom. At this point, the structure begins to take shape. Priority establishes order. Stewardship preserves it. Diligence builds within it. Restraint protects it. But Scripture does not stop here. There is another habit that quietly determines whether wealth multiplies or stagnates. That habit concerns generosity. We will examine that next. Scripture presents generosity in a way that often conflicts with human instinct. It does not frame giving as loss. It frames it as positioning. Throughout the Bible, generosity appears not as an emotional gesture, but as a structural habit. A habit that governs how resources move, how fear is managed, and how provision is sustained. Solomon observed that some people give and continue to gain more. Others withhold even what they have and end up lacking. This pattern is repeated across Scripture, in households, communities, and nations. Generosity breaks something internal. It breaks the assumption that provision is finite. When money is held tightly, fear grows. Fear narrows decisions. Narrow decisions reduce opportunity. Scripture records that when people trusted God enough to release resources, pressure decreased, peace increased, clarity returned. This habit quietly builds wealth because it restores circulation. Money is no longer trapped in preservation mode. It begins moving through relationships, opportunities, and trust. Generosity does not operate independently. It depends on order. When generosity is practiced without discipline, it collapses. When practiced within order, it multiplies. This leads to the sixth habit Scripture emphasizes: avoiding unnecessary debt. The Bible speaks about debt with unusual clarity. The borrower becomes servant to the lender. This is not metaphorical language. It is descriptive. Debt transfers control. It shifts future income into past decisions. It narrows freedom and replaces vision with obligation. Scripture does not forbid all borrowing. It warns against borrowing that does not produce capacity. In biblical economies, debt was tied to land, labor, and tools. Debt used to build productive capacity could be justified. Debt used for consumption led to loss of freedom. Modern systems operate the same way, though the mechanics are quieter. Debt used to fund consumption produces pressure. Debt used to build productive assets can expand capacity. This habit builds wealth quietly because freedom multiplies options, and options increase opportunity. Those free from unnecessary debt can plan, they can wait, they can choose. Those bound by debt react. They rush, they compromise. Scripture consistently shows that freedom precedes stability. The final habit Scripture records is yet not long-term consistency. The Bible does not praise intensity. It praises faithfulness. A little neglect repeated over time produces loss. A little discipline repeated over time produces abundance. This habit ties every other habit together. Priority applied once does not build wealth. Stewardship practiced occasionally does not preserve it. Diligence applied sporadically does not compound. Generosity practiced without consistency does not circulate. Scripture presents wealth as the result of repetition, not emotion, not motivation. Faithfulness is simply structure applied across time. Solomon observed that laziness produces scarcity, not only financially but in life itself. He did not describe laziness as rest. He described it as avoidance. Avoidance of responsibility. Avoidance of discipline. avoidance of effort when effort is required. Scripture shows that a little delay becomes a habit becomes a pattern becomes a destiny. Consistency builds quietly because it is invisible in the moment. No single action looks impressive, but together they compound. This is why Scripture often compares wealth to harvest. Seeds do not produce results overnight, but when planted consistently, they produce predictably. At this point, the structure is complete. Priority establishes order. Stewardship preserves it. Diligence builds within it. Restraint protects it. Generosity circulates it. Freedom sustains it. Consistency compounds it. Scripture does not present these habits as advice. It presents them as observation. Those who practice them experienced stability across generations. Those who ignored them experienced repetition of loss, regardless of income. This explains why two people with identical earnings experience vastly different outcomes. The income is the same. The habits are not. The Bible does not treat money as random. It treats it as responsive. Money follows structure. It responds to order. It settles where alignment exists. This is why Scripture connects wisdom to wealth so consistently. Not because wisdom guarantees riches, but because wisdom governs what riches require to remain. These habits are quiet. They do not draw attention. They do not promise speed. But Scripture shows that they work. Wealth built loudly often disappears just as loudly. Wealth built quietly tends to endure. This is not theory. It is recorded. The question Scripture leaves is not whether these habits are effective. It is whether they will be practiced, not once. Not emotionally, but consistently. That is how wealth has always been built.